So what do you mean by this liberalization? So being liberal, that means to give freedom or let somebody or something free. Public sector reserved only for atomic energy generation and some railway activities. When we buy some products from a market, we also pay the amount including the tax amount. That is indirect tax reforms. Hello everyone, I am Dr. Nikhilavati S, Faculty of Commerce, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, the Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. I welcome you all for the sessions on the subject Economics for first PUC. So in this session, let us discuss what was the background for introducing this new economic reforms in 1991, as well as what is liberalization that happened in India and what kind of liberalization in tax, foreign exchange and trade sector, as well as the privatization. As we all know, in 1990s, India had already adopted mixed economic system where it was following both private and capitalistic as well as socialistic mixed form of economic structure, where it gave importance to both private sector as well as the main powers and the authority was held with public sector. And here India adopted a mixed economy model. As we all know, it consists of both capitalistic and socialistic features, and it created various rules and regulations from 1950 to 1990 in order to control and regulate the economy. That it made the decision of following the mixed economic system with two views. One is, after this they have put the rules and regulations. Those regulations have hampered growth and development, and growth achieved in savings, industrial diversification, agriculture and food security. But these regulations and rules did not contribute to the growth and development of the country. Rather, they created a disturbance and hindrance for the overall growth and development. Because of the too many rules and restrictions that are put on the import substitution, foreign policies and for the maintenance of foreign reserves, these could not contribute much growth in the overall economic development, and India had faced the economic crisis in 1991. Relating to the external debt, India was not in a position to repay the loan it borrowed from the abroad. Particularly, foreign exchange reserves had dropped in such a low level that it was not even sufficient to maintain the import payments for a fortnight. And this financial crisis was further compounded by the increasing level of general price levels of essential commodities. So all these regulations, rules and the development and these aspects of where it was affecting even the common people, reduced foreign exchange reserves, all these contributed towards the introduction of economic reforms in 1991. So this particularly the external debt crisis, where the government was unable to repay foreign borrowings, then the foreign exchange reserves fell, and after that there were rising prices of essential goods. Even it worsened the situations more. So the government took a decision to introduce a new policy measures where it will make a shift in developmental strategy. That is the economic reforms that were formed in 1991. So particularly when we have to discuss about the background of why this 1991 new economic policy was brought. So mainly this origin of 1991 was because of the financial crisis and the new economic policies that was formed in 1991. And there was India had to go for taking an emergency loan, and India borrowed around $7 million from World Bank, that is IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as World Bank, as well as it approached IMF, that is International Monetary Fund. So under these conditions, So both World Bank and IMF lent India $7 billion, but they put some conditions for India. That is, that India has to go for liberalization and private sector freedom. And India has to go for reducing the government's role, as well as it has to remove trade restrictions. So under these conditions put by these international agencies, India agreed to these conditions and borrowed the loan of $7 billion. So out of this conditions, and in order to overcome the economic crisis and encourage international competitiveness, as well as to protect the domestic businessmen, it took a measure called LPG, that is New Economic Policy, in 1991, aimed at introduction of LPG, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization. So the main goals of introducing this economic policy was to make India a competitive economy and to remove all kinds of restrictions and barriers to entry and the growth in the field of industrial sector, particularly when it comes to the international relations and international trading. So this formulation of new policy was taken with two policy measures, that is, one is stabilization measures. That means stabilization measures were short term and it was taken to control inflation as well as to improve the foreign exchange reserves, whereas the structural reforms were taken for the longer period of time, and these rules were applied only to improve the efficiency and global competitiveness of Indian economy. Moving forward, liberalization in India. So one of the policy that was formed under New Economic Policy 1991 was liberalization. So what do you mean by this liberalization? So being liberal, that means to give freedom or let somebody or something free. So it is liberalization here refers to the deregulation, like reducing the rules and restrictions that were put for various sectors on or various economic activities. So the first one was deregulation of industrial sector. So under liberalization policy, India had liberalized the various rules and regulations for different sectors of the economy, both in terms of industrial sector, in the finance sector, etc., and even in the foreign exchange. So let us see what was done in the deregulation of industrial sector. So it abolished industrial licensing. That means earlier there were strict rules to obtain license from the government if any individual or a group of people wanted to start a business. But after liberalization, so that licensing formalities were reduced and more control from the government side was reduced, and even public sector or the individuals could start the business after liberalization, and only for some of the products like alcohol, cigarettes, hazardous chemicals, explosives, electronics, aerospace, drugs and pharma. Except these form of products, for all other products and services, it abolished industrial licensing. Next, public sector reserved only for atomic energy generation and some railway activities. That means earlier, when we studied in the previous sessions in the how was Indian economy from 1950 to 1990, there we have studied that India in industrial policy 1956, it had grouped various industries into different schedules, where Schedule A and those companies are only regulated and controlled by the government sector, and Schedule B, where even the private sector can also take part along with the government sector, and whereas Schedule C companies or the products can be produced by any of the individual, it can be any small scale industries also. So here, after this liberalization policy was taken, so the public sector reserved only few of the Schedule A companies, especially the atomic energy, defense activities, railway sectors, and for that matter even postals, are in the hands of public sector. Then it also done de-reservation of many small-scale industry products. So it didn't reserve the small-scale industry products under the control of the government. Rather than it gave the control or the authority to produce some of the small-scale industry products even to the private sector. And regarding the price determination, the government has given that control to the market forces. So here the prices of the commodities or products and services varied as per the market forces like demand and supply rather than controlled by the government. Let us see what are the reforms that were introduced in financial sector. So in financial sector, the RBI reduced from regulator to facilitator. So earlier RBI was only taking the whole control of the banking sector, but now it also reduced some of its controlling authority only. And even now RBI is the apex body and the main controller of the monetary policies in India, but it reduced some of its extreme controls and rules and regulations regarding the whole financial sector, particularly regarding the private sector, banks, and the rules and restrictions it had put for the international banks. So here it turned into a regulator to facilitator, where it allowed even the private sector and the foreign banks to come to India and establish their branches. Then it raised foreign investment limit in banks to up to 74%. Then some of the banks were allowed to open branches without RBI approval also. But even though it could open its branches without RBI's approval, some of the managerial rules and regulations were again with the hands of RBI only. So that is in order to save the domestic customers and the account holders of that foreign banks. And talking about FIIs, that is foreign institutional investors like merchant bankers or mutual funds, pension funds were allowed to invest in Indian markets. So this was the reform that had happened in the financial sector, where various foreign companies and private sector banks were allowed to establish the branches in India and operate in India. So however, they were also have to confined to the rules and regulations of RBI. And RBI held some of the managerial functions like that too, particularly with reference to the regulations regarding the maintenance of the account holders there, for the safeguard of the account holders of India. Next, when it comes to the liberalization of tax reforms. So here tax reforms or the decisions regarding taxation can also be called as fiscal policy. So we all know that the government generates revenues for the development of various sectors only through the collection of various taxes and incomes. So here it was the time to reduce the direct tax percentage. So the government reduction in direct tax. So direct tax here refers to the tax that is paid directly on the income generated by an individual. So or even the corporate sector. So either it can be income tax. Income tax is the tax levied on the income of an individual or on the salary, whereas corporate tax is a tax levied on the income generated by a business. So here, in order to curb the tax evasion and encourage savings, it had reduced the percentage of tax that is charged on the income of both individuals and the businesses. Then it took indirect tax reforms. So indirect tax is a tax that is levied indirectly on the goods and services that consumers purchase. So when we buy some product from a market, we also pay the amount including the tax amount. That is indirect tax reforms. And however, there were various indirect taxes earlier, like value added tax or luxury tax, entertainment tax, etc. But now we have reduced that indirect taxation, and a great move was taken in 2017 recently regarding one nation, one tax and one market. With this code, the government introduced GST, that is goods and service tax. So next, they also did simplification of tax procedures for both direct and indirect taxes. So apart from that, what was the liberalization policy that was taken for foreign exchange? So what was this foreign exchange reforms? So in 1991, rupee devalued to boost foreign exchange inflow, and not only that, it was to shift to market determined exchange rate. So even now we have this exchange rates are determined as per the market forces. So exchange rate is not with the hands of the government, rather than it is based on the demand and supply of the foreign currencies in the financial market. Moving forward, one of the important sectors, that is trade and investment policy reforms. Particularly, even the international agencies put their conditions based on this international trade. So to make India more open for the foreign companies and the foreign institutions, and for imports and export, and having international relations. So here the main aim was to increase the global competitiveness and efficiency of the domestic businesses. So India removed quantitative restrictions on imports and exports. It also reduced the tariff rates. Tariff here means the tax that is put on the imports that are made. So tariff rates it reduced to encourage more and more imports and export and international trading activities. And it also abolished import licensing. That means especially if the companies in India wanted to import some of the products from abroad, for that also it was supposed to get a license from the government, and it abolished import licensing and only for except hazardous industries. So except for importing the hazardous any kind of like chemicals. So apart from that, for all other kinds of goods and services that are imported from abroad is like license free. Then it also removed export duties to boost international trade. It not only abolished the license to improve, but also it reduced the export duties that are paid on the exports. Now let us study about privatization. So privatization is all about, as the name itself says, privatization. That means allowing even the private sector to take up various economic activities. Like here, the government did the privatization through these economic reforms in various methods. So one is that the government's withdrawal from ownership and management of public sector enterprises, where one of the method of privatization is where the government withdrawn its ownership as well as management of public sector enterprises, and it allowed the private sector to take up the these PSCs, and they can also do in this method where they'll outrightly sell the PSCs to private entities. So if not only just giving or part of the management or ownership to private sector, but even the privatization can also be done where selling part of the PSCs to private entities. And there is one concept called disinvestment. Disinvestment means where the private sector invests and takes up a public sector undertaking. So that means it is a disinvestment from the side of public sector, where the public sector enterprise is sold to the private sector, that is disinvestment. Then they can also go for privatization by selling part of the equity of PSCs to the public. Say for example, if A Limited was a government owned company where all the shares were held by the government or central government or state government, if it allows its shares to be bought by the public, it can also like selling part of the equity shares to the public. So, encouraging the individuals to take up the shares and hold shares in the public sector enterprises. So, these are the methods in which the privatization can be done. So, here India went for privatization through the various methods. So, under the economic reforms, in order to encourage even the private sector, both individuals and businessmen, to take up the economic activities which contributed to the overall growth of industrial sector in India. And the main purpose of this privatization was to improve the financial discipline in the country and to spread out that financial, the ability to manage and improve the finance and generate income both with the public sector as well as the private sector, and to facilitate more and more modernization, utilize private capital and managerial skills for better PSU performance. So, it is not just to encourage the financial discipline and also to facilitate modernization, but also utilize the money and the capital that was available with the public and to manage the PSUs and for a better performance, and not only that, to get the managerial skills from the private sector also. And some of the expected benefits from this policy of privatization is, India did it with the aim of achieving better efficiency and competitiveness, and it can increase inflow of foreign direct investment. So, to increase the foreign direct investment, also to get the efficiency and increase the competitiveness from this privatization. So, globalization and privatization both were the important economic reforms that were undertaken by the government of India in 1991, aimed at overall development of the nation by increasing the global competitiveness, extending the the opportunities even to the private sector, as well as allowing all the foreign rules and regulations, as well as reducing the rules and regulations for this import and export activities in order to increase the global competitiveness, as well as it also took measures to protect the domestic customers and the businessmen. And as we discussed earlier, the main aim of these economic reforms was to overcome the financial crisis that happened in India during 1980s to 1990s. So, this was all regarding today's topic. Hope you all have understood. Thank you.